Welcome to Energy Policy Watch. I'm Jack Belcher. Our guest today is Christi Craddick, Chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission, which regulates the oil and gas industry in the state of Texas and is the oldest regulatory body in the state. Chairman Craddick, it's great to have you here today. Welcome to Energy Policy Watch.
Thanks for having me, Jack. We're 130 years old actually as an agency this year. So
that's amazing.
Pretty amazing. We've been doing oil and gas for 102 years, I think of that. So we're glad to still be around. We think we're pretty important.
It's an amazing history for sure. Well, the past year has been amazing. It's been amazingly challenging for the oil and gas industry, especially in Texas. We've had a disintegration of the oil market earlier in the last year, an international price war, oil prices below zero, and then we had the record cold wave and blackouts. So what has the Railroad Commission's role been in helping the oil and gas industry in Texas meet these enormous challenges that it's faced?
You know, this past year has been amazing. And first and foremost, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. I think there's a lot that's been going on with this industry. I was reflecting that 13 months ago, we started COVID, and it seems like a lot longer. But I had the quietest Easter I've had in a year. A year ago, I was talking about what we were doing a year ago, and we were in the middle of proration. And I was on the phone on Easter Sunday with the White House, and at that time, the Secretary of Energy the U.S. Secretary of Energy trying to figure out what we were going to do on proration and how this market was going to stabilize out. So I think what has been important about the Railroad Commission and what we have strived to do is have regulatory certainty in this whole past year and figure out ways to make sure this industry survives, not only in Texas, but now we've got some obviously federal challenges with the new administration that I know we'll talk about in a little bit, but regulatory certainty and educating people about what we do. So I thought I'd kind of go through a little bit about where we were a year ago, because I do think it's an interesting story about how we've gotten here. And I thought it was going to be a quiet spring, and boy, it hasn't been at all. But this industry's always got us on our toes, I think. You know, if you go back to March, so I always go back to spring break because I have a daughter. And so we were at spring break last year and thinking it was going to be kind of quiet, although we'd watched Saudi Arabia and Russia try to play they're going to win in the market. And well, we always figure out when the Saudis try to do this and Russia that they don't win, and the U.S. always survives, which I'm appreciative of that. We always come out of this looking a little bit different, but that's kind of where we were in March as COVID started, and we got a phone call, or I did, saying we're going to ask you to prorate. And I went, you're going to what? We haven't prorated. I mean, basically in a lifetime. You know, definitely in a lifetime of an agency, and since 1972, 73, we haven't actively prorated in this state. And they said, well, we think this might be the time to do it. And we said, well, we don't know how to do it. And by the way, we've just shut the agency down due to COVID, so we can't go back in the building, right? Nobody knew whether it was safe or not at that point. Now, our agency never really shut down, by the way. We had inspectors on the ground. Our people have done a great job, and our mailroom didn't close, so we've been an active agency, but we weren't back in the building. We couldn't go in our library and research how to do proration. So we started trying to figure it out as an agency. And again, like I said, last Easter, I was on the phone because at that point, you saw the President Trump at that point and the U.S. Department of Energy looking to try to figure out how to help this industry as well. They appreciated that this industry is important, not to Texas only, but to the country and really on the international market. But the volume of oil, and as far as demand, was off to 80%, off 100% very, very quickly at this time last year. And so we were trying to figure out what to do and how to get the Saudis and the Russians back re-engaged and say, look, you've made a big mistake and miscalculated, which again, they're prone to do sometimes, thinking they're gonna win. And I appreciate that this industry, always led by Texas, survives and continues to survive. And then you go about basically this time a year ago, we were in the middle of a proration hearing, and long hours on the phone with a lot of people and a lot of emails and a lot of information we received as an agency. trying to understand what that meant, what it meant, not just for upstream, but midstream and all the way downstream. And we had people from all over the world watch our hearing. We're all sitting here on Zoom. It's become commonplace, but we had never done Zoom really as an agency, and we had 29,000 people watch our proration hearing from all over the world. Now, if you were in Hawaii, you weren't interested. I think that says where we need to go on vacation. But if you were also in South Korea, they're our second highest audience last year, which I think is amazing. We'd like to know and go find some good markets. I think for those of you looking for opportunities, South Korea was really interested in what we were doing as well. So 29,000 people, almost 11 hours of hearings. I took 15 pages of notes. And it was important information to have conversations about, and it wasn't big versus small. It wasn't pipes versus manufacturers. Everybody had a different position. And we had a lot of conversations with other states, with Canada, and the real conversation became, what can we do, and does it make sense? And then we go about a week past that, and you saw oil hit a negative $37 and change, which I hope never to see again in my lifetime, by the way. And I think it, for most of us at the agency, and even probably for industry at that point, became clear within the next week or so that the market was going to work itself out, which is the decision we made. I think it was a good decision. We realized even by as early as June. And so that being said, that conversation was an important conversation, but on the back end of that, and on the side, by the way, we were also as an agency trying to make sure, again, that this industry had an opportunity to survive. We all believed we were going to come out of it. Now it will look different, and well, I'd like to hear what y'all think it's going to look like, because it always looks different, and it looks a little different even than a year ago where we are. But I think what we wanted to make sure as an agency that we were doing is giving people opportunities. So as you look in April and May and even into June, we were waiving timelines, we were waiving penalties, we were picking up the phone a lot and talking to and emailing back and forth with a lot of companies who needed some extra time to make sure that they were in compliance, that we weren't affecting the environment, but to make sure they still had an opportunity to, one, pay their people over here, but still try to maintain an oil and gas industry. And so we've done that, did that a lot through the end of last year, although we still have a handful of things we're still working through this year and are allowing people some extra time on. And I think people appreciated that. I think we've had over 1,000 phone calls and emails and gave a lot of opportunity for people and companies to continue to work through processes and work through stuff. And so, but again, regulatory certainty was important. And we got through the summer, and here we came again with other challenges, and we'll go forward on those again. But what has happened to us as an agency and what has happened to this industry has been really important, and how we come out of this and come out of it smart, I think, long term. I mean, I'm encouraged to see that you're starting to see service companies hire back again. Right. They're always the first to go, and sometimes they're the last to come back on. So I'm encouraged to see that hiring numbers are beginning to recover. Rig numbers are beginning to recover, but we've completed in this state, it looks like, a lot of drilled but uncompleted wells. That's given people an opportunity to continue to do have some people on the ground, but we've lost some people in this industry, up to 100,000 in this state, we think. And that's going to be a real challenge for us as we recover. We've got to have people again.
Sure. No, and it's an amazing story. And I remember watching those hearings and thinking to myself, what a historic moment that it really was in the industry, in the state of Texas, and what a testament to the Railroad Commission to be there as that stable regulator. Here we are, with prices recovering, and as you mentioned, industry starting to recover. How amazing is the resiliency of the industry? But now we move into a new era with a new administration, a new Congress with a Democratic majority in both houses, and bringing with it enormous regulatory and potentially sweeping legislative challenges to energy and environmental policy. and the implications to the state of Texas and the energy industry are huge. Can you tell us about what challenges the Commission's facing with regard to federal policy, and what the Commission in the state of Texas can be doing in this time?
Well, so I will start by saying I'm glad we are in Texas than some other states who have a lot more federal land, right? I think it gives us a better opportunity to continue to produce. For those of you who don't realize it, but our neighbors in New Mexico and in Oklahoma and other Western states have a lot of federal land, about 50%. We're in Texas, we have 5% of our land is federal. So most of our drilling is done on with private property, private operators, and we're glad about that. And so we're the first day really out of the bat, you saw this administration, one, cancel the Keystone XL pipeline, which TransCanada, whatever you want to call it, it's had multiple names, which doesn't make a lot of sense, quite frankly, and it never has. You know, we've had it, or this, what I consider the southern part, open since 2013-14 in this state. And it's important to have Canada as our trading partner. I got to talk to one of my Canadian counterparts the day after the president had done that, and I will say they weren't real thrilled with us as a country, and it's unfortunate because now one of our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, both in the North American world, are really important to us, and now we've cut a pipeline off again when we should have that pipeline going. So I think that was first day off the bat. And I appreciate that they said they were going to do it, but boy, they did it. And it's very political, I think, without having a lot of common sense about how this industry works and how important it is. The second piece that we've watched this administration already do is pause on federal permits and for drilling. And obviously that, again, affects our other neighbors, but not us as much. We're glad that it doesn't affect us. We think there's opportunity in about 2 years when all those permits that people were able to get right before this administration walked in the door, when they expire in roughly 2 years, that a lot more people will be in Texas, and we're glad for that. But I do think that, look, I put an op-ed out early on, and I still believe this, although we haven't had a phone call yet, that if this administration would reach out to those of us in this state and other places in this industry and have conversations about the jobs we create, how important this industry is, not just to the United States, but across the world, that they take a second look at it and say, okay, maybe we can work together. And I haven't seen that outreach, and it's unfortunate as we continue on. When you look at not just coming out of the last recession, but even coming out of COVID, people need jobs. And the biggest job creator in the last 10 years has been the energy industry, led by the oil and gas industry. And so thank you. I know you and I are going to talk in a minute about this cold 6 weeks ago. I didn't know we named storms until this last year, but we can't just rely on wind and solar. They didn't work, and they don't work all the time. It is important to have natural gas. It's important to have coal. It's important to have nuclear. We've got a portfolio in Texas that has all of the above, and that's important. And frankly, you can't go to alternative energy without having natural gas, and we sure have a lot of it. So I think not just that, but you look at the jobs it creates with pipelines, you look at the jobs it creates with LNG. And I always tell people, if you can produce all you want, but if you can't get it to market, it doesn't matter. And I think that's where this administration is potentially looking at more rules and regulations to clamp down on even just getting it to market, much less drilling it. And that's going to be unfortunate, not just, like I said, for this country, but across the world. We had a few months last year, we were a net exporter of energy products, and now we're back being a net importer again. I noticed that they're back trying to work with Saudi Arabia, and I think we watched that last year. And so can't always work with Saudi Arabia. I think we're losing the opportunity to continue to be a leader in the world by scaling back and trying to say, look, we don't like our own products. And instead, the Northeast brings LNG in from Qatar and Russia instead of getting it from from Texas, for instance, or even Pennsylvania or Ohio. A lot of other states are producing natural gas and oil. And so I think this administration is going to be a real challenge for us. Again, we'd love for them to reach out, but we haven't seen them do that. If they mirror the Obama administration had 144 rules and regulations that they were looking at or had in play when they walked out the door. We anticipate there'll be a lot more of those come back. Methane, we know, is coming back again. Never really is left, but we anticipate that methane and flaring and other rules like that will come back into play. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for this state. It's why it will continue to be important for the Railroad Commission to be fully funded and be a strong regulatory body going forward.
Well, I think that's very interesting what you say about, I mean, the messages. I've noticed that the president spoke in front of a labor group a couple of weeks ago, and the pipe fitters were there, and there were questions about natural gas, and certainly, you know, there are challenges when it comes to walking that tightrope there with jobs and the economy, and it's important to keep that message going. And America's leadership in the world with natural gas exports and crude oil exports. So those are all very important things. You mentioned the deep freeze and the resulting blackouts, and obviously that had a major impact in Texas and was global news there for a couple of weeks. And you've been taking a leadership role in explaining what happened and what the state needs to do to ensure that doesn't happen again. So what is the agency's lane in terms of fixing the problem or preventing the problem in the future? And what does the state of Texas need to do to prevent it from happening again?
You know, it's been an interesting 6 weeks, and it was definitely an interesting week during the winter storm. By the way, I'm one of those that lost power. So I sure wanted it to figure out how to get it back on quickly. I will say, I think the natural gas industry, in my opinion, really saved the state. When you go look at how much natural gas was used and came online and was used in our electricity grid. Well, so I'd like to kind of give you a little bit of history to the ramp up, because I think it gives you a little perspective as we got into this storm. And I think we all talk about it being Sunday the 14th and what a rough day it was. But if you go look at North Texas, West Texas, they were already below freezing by Thursday, right? And so they were already by the 11th, they'd already were in freezing and would stay frozen. And I say frozen meaning below 32 degrees for about 8 days. And so that's half our state was already frozen before we ever got to those of us who live in Austin and Houston, before it ever really hit us that we started talking about it. And look, we've had since 1972, 73, a gas curtailment order in place that we use during storms, whether they're cold or warm. We've used this curtailment order. It will be something we relook at to make sure the priorities are correct as we go forward. But we were asked on Thursday by the Public Utility Commission to really relook at that and make sure that gas power plants were given some priority status, because they knew we were going to be tight on power. So on Friday night, the 12th February the 12th at 6:30 at night, we had an emergency hearing that we readjusted our order. And look, historically, we've always prioritized residential because you've got to have gas going to people's house, right? Churches, schools, and LDCs, right? Your gas utility company, it's important to have gas flowing to those companies. We have 4.6 million households who get gas into their homes. And if something goes off, by safety standards, you go house by house to turn that back on. By the way, we only lost, of that 4.6 million households, we only lost 2,100 during this whole storm. So I think that's a pretty good record, by the way. But second in place that we put that evening was we put gas power plants, that gas should flow next to them. And again, it was gas power plants in our mind that had firm gas that they'd had firm gas contracts for them. And then then we didn't change our priority. That's all we did was adjust, because what we're recognizing in this state is that more and more people are electric only in their homes, right? They don't get natural gas in their homes. And so to have heat, you've got to have electricity. So that was the 12th, and we're going along. We get to Sunday, and it gets real cold in this state, all the way into the valley, all the way into Houston. Really a record setting freeze for the whole state. And on Sunday night, Monday morning, depending on how you want to look at it, but at 2:00, the grid turned off a lot of us. And I was one of them. So we had been having conversations and have a group called Texas Energy Reliability Council that the railroad commissions had involved for years and years. It's not just a group come lately. It's been us as the railroad commission. Also, we put PUC, ERCOT gets involved, the big pipeline companies, the gas utility companies, operators, electricity companies were involved, associations who had information. So we're all having daily phone calls starting on the 11th to make sure we're managing what's going on in the state. And as we get into that weekend as well, we start withdrawing gas out of storage. And so that became an important piece for the state. But you get to Monday, again, we have no power in the state for a lot of people. And we get on a phone call on Monday morning, and I'm on listening, and they said, it isn't just gas that has gone down, it's nuclear, it's coal, we have no wind blowing, the sun hasn't been out at this point in 6 days in spots. And so we've got some real challenges in this state. And we get to Tuesday, and same phone call, same group, and we get in, not much has changed in the power sector. And I get off phone call and actually talk to my staff. I'm like, we have to figure out how to do something. And about that point, here comes West Texas starts to call, and they say, okay, look, we don't have any power at our house. I get a CEO calls me that morning and says, I don't have any power at my house, and you can walk across my swimming pool because it's frozen solid. But TxDOT's been out. They're now grading roads. It's getting a little bit safer. We can get our crews back out, particularly far west Delaware is beginning to unfreeze, but there's no power out there. And I went, what do you mean there's no power? And they said they turned off the power to the fields. We don't have any power, and we can't operate without power. And I went, okay. So will you please start getting us coordinates? And we got on the phone with associations in West Texas and South Texas and said, communicate with your membership, and let's go figure out where we can get some power on. If they can get to their fields and get some gas flowing, let's start getting that information to the electricity companies and get the power back on. So as we get into Tuesday afternoon, that's really what happened. And we're sending grid coordinates back in to these electricity wires companies saying, please turn the power on here. And if you look at Wednesday morning, and look, we had a couple of companies saying to us, we're at max withdrawal, and our pressures are going down as far as natural gas withdrawal. We've got to have some solutions pretty quickly. If you look at Wednesday morning, we're at 10% flow coming back online. Look, you can't just flip a switch. You've got to go check your equipment, make sure it's okay. You've got to make sure that saltwater disposal wells are unfrozen and can take your water. People forgot about that. That's really important as well. And then you've got to make sure those gas processing plants are online too. And so it's a whole chain. And I think that, and by Thursday, we had 40% flow coming out back into the state. And the situation began to resolve itself because you could finally get gas back into places where it needed to go again. Look, the real challenge, I think, even though you had agencies and groups on the phone, you had PUC and ERCOT say on these phone calls, we didn't realize how interconnected we really were and how important you were. And I think that's a real challenge we've got going forward. So as we've talked to the legislature, look, we did 2 long days of hearings, and they did 2 in the legislature, and we need to resolve some issues. And so some of the ideas we've come to the table with, and I think there are a lot floating in the legislature's work. Texas legislature's working through this, but part of it is, we ought to know where our assets are across the state, right? And look, if you look through our commission, we've got a good GIS mapping system. We can tell you where
Right.
wells are and we can tell you where pipelines are. We ought to map the assets, make sure we've got a good, vibrant map, and then lay the electricity grid on top of us and say, look, these are the priorities. And companies need to know that they have opportunities to be in the priority grid. Nobody knew that. Even we didn't know that as an agency. So that conversation's ongoing, and I think the mapping will be important. We've been asked to weatherize. I think that's an interesting conversation. We're not the North Slope. We are not Alaska, so weatherization doesn't mean winterization all the time. It also means weatherization for 100-degree weather, and those don't always mix. And so figuring out what that is going to be a conversation we're going to need industry involved in to see what best standards are. And by the way, I believe that most people did weatherize and winterize to the ability they had and to what they've been asked to do. 20 degrees is a lot different than -4. So,
Right.
so I think that's part of the conversation. We're also have asked to make sure that this Texas Energy Reliability Council, is not just an ad hoc group. We think it ought to be a permanent group, that we have a lot better conversations back and forth. We're going to relook at our curtailment orders, like I said, because I think as an industry and frankly as a state, we need to appreciate now that it isn't just natural gas that heats us, but that we do have a lot of electricity that heats us, and we need to figure out how to keep that better online if we have an issue. And look, the last piece, to me, I think there's opportunity out of this too.
Yeah.
When you look at what we've built in the last several years, we've not built a lot of storage in the state. And I say storage, I mean dry gas storage. So
Right.
you can say we've built storage in the state, and sure we have for ethanol and liquid natural gas products, but we haven't for dry gas. And we've got salt domes and we have depleted fields, and both of those are opportunities and really it should be utilized long term, because again, we withdrew for 5 days in this state of natural gas, dry natural gas, and I think that taught us something, that there's opportunity. And when you're looking forward, I really do have to again tip my hats to these gas utility companies, these LDCs. They planned for it. They got gas and got heat to where it needed to go without a lot of issues, and they were willing, and we all do. We pay those rates, but they had certainty of what they were doing and had contingency plans and a lot of plans for it. So I think that between that and recognizing that natural gas is not just a Texas commodity, and not just a U.S. commodity, but an international commodity. And there's some opportunities, and yeah, they're going to be winners and losers in this, but it shouldn't be ratepayers and it shouldn't be consumers who are sitting in the cold. So communication really long term is going to be that much more important, I think, in this state.
Well, it really is amazing how complex the whole situation was, and the, I guess, the lessons learned about how the entire energy complex works, and the interconnectivity. And so I think, like you said, opportunities come from this situation, opportunities to better understand the system, how it works together, improve, ensure these things don't happen again, but also create a more efficient system, I think. And
I
what you
think
said about gas storage is so true. We've kind of moved away from that in recent years, so opportunities there. Well, on the subject of natural gas, the Biden administration is working on a new methane rule, and we've gone back and forth with this. We had the Obama rule, we had a new rule making under Trump. Now we're back with a new rule making under the Biden administration. And at the same time, there's been greater scrutiny placed on industry in Texas by the NGOs, by the media, and increasingly by investor groups on flaring and methane emissions and leaks in the shale plays. So can you tell us a little bit about what the commission's doing to address the flaring and methane leak situation, while at the same time preserving our ability to supply energy to the U.S. and the world? As you mentioned, the world depends on our natural gas ever increasingly these days.
This has been a challenge and will continue to be a challenge, I think, for the state. And we developed a lot very, very quickly. And so for the last 18 months, when you look at what we've been doing internally as an agency, we've been looking at it. We've been focused on specifically flaring, and trying to figure out how we manage it better in the state, working with industry, working actually with some of those NGOs. So you go look at what we've done, and the priorities have been trying to limit some of that flaring. It's time for industry to figure it out, and some of it is being helped because we are building more pipe. And I think that's helped a lot. But you've also got the real challenge that you've got people who can't get to pipe, don't have enough pressure. You've got old pipe. There's some challenges with that. And so what we've done as an agency, we've gone in as an agency and looked at flaring exceptions. It's a Rule 32 for us as an agency. And we've now been a lot stricter in the volumes we're allowing you to flare, the time periods we're allowing you to flare. And if you go look at September, so while proration was going on, the other piece we were working through pretty actively at that point was, what do we do with flaring going forward? And you saw us in September of this past year put a new flaring data rule sheet in place. It's collecting more information. We recognized, look, some of y'all know we're on a mainframe with Fortran, and so our data is old and it's hard to get to it. And we think that's important to understand better what our data is. You know, you get one company or one group that says, you know, you're emitting this much, Texas, and the next week somebody else will say you're emitting that much, and we go, we don't think those numbers are right, but we need to have better data. We need to be more transparent. So that data sheet's in place. We'll have it fully automated later this summer. And so that's going to be a priority for us. We've also are differentiating as you report that flaring versus venting. And we think that'll be important to understand that as well. So and then we've watched industry, frankly, of their own accord, come out with different groups and have priorities to limit flaring for themselves as well. It's not just, it doesn't always work just for the regulatory body to be involved. I always think that you've got to have industry really be engaged with that. And I think they have been. When you look at the last 10 years, we've seen the methane emissions in this country, and particularly in Texas, go down about 70%. And yet we're drilling a lot more natural gas. So I think you've seen this industry move the right direction. There's always room for improvement, and we've watched what New Mexico's done just recently. We've looked at what North Dakota's doing, and they're trying to manage through it. Those were the 3 states that have the biggest challenges, right? And so that will continue to be an ongoing process for us, but we are really looking at companies that frankly don't have pipe attached to them when we got to have pipe as you're drilling. We're really beginning to look at making sure there's pipe or potential for pipe to go into a field or an area instead of just flaring that gas permanently. And so that information is going to be really important long-term for us as data sheets. Again, it's part of the conversation we hope to continue to have with the federal government, but we haven't had a lot of conversation back. I think the recognition that what both this agency and industry are managing it. We're also having conversations with our sister agency, TCEQ, because they are the air emissions. And again, they're trying to collect better data as well. And we've all been having those conversations again for about 18 months. We want to make sure our data matches, right? And when you have computer systems that don't talk to each other, that's a little bit of a challenge, but they've been focused on that as well. And so as we're collecting data, they're trying to collect similar data so we know what the full picture looks like as we're trying to manage this.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Great opportunities, I think, ahead. When you mention the mainframe and some of the challenges in terms of technology, it makes me think about budget. And obviously the commission has been impacted by the loss of revenue from oil and gas activities, but it also plays a critical role in ensuring that oil and gas revenues are realized by the state, which is a challenge for the state of Texas. Can you explain a little bit about what's at stake in the budget process and kind of what you're working on doing in this challenging time in terms of budget?
Sure. Budget's important. The legislature's in. They're trying. In fact, at this point, the Senate's passed their budget. The House is working on it, and so we walked in the door this year thinking we were going to have a great budget. We came out of last cycle with a great budget, and we appreciate that the legislature is finally understanding how important not just this industry, but this agency is to the state. And they have been helpful for us to try in the last several years to try to put more inspectors on the ground and to try to make sure our budget is funded much more so we can keep good people. And when you talk about our mainframe Fortran challenge, we went into last session saying, look, we've got a plan. When I got to this agency in 2012, some of you have heard me say this, we were basically logging in with Novell and it was all in hard copy. Everything you filed with us, everything we did was in hard copy, and or we were keystroking it in. And we've managed to upgrade some of that. You look at our GIS mapping system, you look at our website, even a lot more data, a lot more transparent, and it's more efficiencies for us as well. And so one of the places we've really managed to be more efficient since I've gotten here has been getting permits out the door, especially just oil and gas, not SWDs. We know we've got some real challenges continue, and that's first on the automation world as we go forward. But when I got to this agency, it was taking 60 days for an expedited permit to get out the door for an oil and gas drilling permit. And that's not realistic or reasonable. Today, even before the downturn, it was taking us 2 days because we'd upgraded that piece of our IT. So we went to the legislature last cycle and said, look, we've got a plan. We need to be more automated. We've got to get off the mainframe and Fortran. This doesn't make any sense. People want our data. And by the way, other states are doing this. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We think we can go look. California's just done it. North Dakota, Oklahoma. There are 17 other states that have upgraded their IT. We don't need to be behind. We need to be on the forefront. And so the legislature last cycle gave us $25 million to start the process. We know it's about a 5-6 year process, up to 7, depending on how quickly we can migrate our data over. And we signed our contract last February. So timing's everything in some respects. And so we are moving forward, and we're on time at this point, under budget. We've gone into the legislature and said, we can't quit now. It'll cost us more. Please give us another $21 million. And they recognize that we have a good track record and are moving forward. So that was part of our ask. But last year really affected our budget. We are fee-based as an agency. And so we walked in thinking, again, we were going to have a great year. And then we're off over 70% in the number of drilling permits we're putting out to date. And that affected our budget by 30%. So think about your budget. You're running a company and you're off 30%. And by the way, we took a 5% cut like every other state agency did through the summer, because oil and gas really affects the entire state budget. It's sure. 35% on any given day of the state budget. And it makes a big difference when industry's off. And so whether it's, property taxes and sales taxes or severance taxes, which goes into our rainy day fund. And so as an agency, we're still off 30%. We've done what we believe are smart things, which is quit hiring people. The good news is there's not a lot of other places for people to go, so don't come steal my people, right? But we're roughly at 850 people in holding, and that's the highest number we've been in about 15 years. That's a good number for us to be at. But we quit hiring people unless it was a critical person, and we consider an inspector a critical person. We quit buying trucks. We quit doing training. We quit doing a lot of things that you have to do when you're off 30%. And long term, we see some recovery. But again, if we're looking at how this industry is beginning to recover, the number of drilling permits this industry will need in the next 2 years, we believe, will be off by a third. And that's early numbers, but technology always improves. Industry does it to us every time. They improve, they get smarter, they get more volume out with fewer permits, and that's good for industry, but it's tough for this agency. So we've walked in and said, look, we want to improve our IT because we think it'll give us more efficiency and be more transparent long-term. But we need to continue to have good people, and we're going to be short in the next biennium. Please figure out how to give us some dollars. If we don't want to cut people, and we don't want to cut critical infrastructure and critical inspections. We inspected more wells and did more inspections last year being at home than we ever have before. That needs to continue to be a priority. We plugged 1,400 wells last year. We'll plug 1,400 again this year. And that continues to be a priority, is to plug abandoned wells in the state. So that's a conversation that's ongoing. And if you're talking to legislators or talking to people, please remind them to try to fund us. We're not asking for an increase, by the way. We get that state budget's tight. We just want to maintain where we are. We think it's important, not just because of what's going on in the state, but now obviously what's going on federally. This agency needs to be fully funded to be able to do our job. We do not want the federal government in here trying to tell the state of Texas what to do.
Wow. So, I mean, just amazing challenges. Thank you so much for the insights. It's just we said at the beginning, it's been an incredible year with incredible challenges, an amazing story here, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today and be a guest on our show. And thank you for your service and your commitment to the state of Texas and the industry. And we hope you can join us again in the future. Wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And if we can do anything to help, please call. But I appreciate y'all having me today. And we've had an interesting year. I think I'm hopeful greener grass is coming, by the way. So thank you.
Let's hope. Well, thank you. And thank you to our viewers. If you're interested in being a guest on Energy Policy Watch, please come to our website, energypolicywatch.com. And if you have any questions, you can visit us at that website. Thanks very much and have a great day.